Welcome, everybody, and thank you very, very much for joining us to reimagine democracy together. We have a lot of ground to cover, so let's get to it. Here's what we're going to be doing. After Professor Danielle Allen opens our program, we'll have 40 minutes of panel discussion, followed by 45 minutes when they will answer your questions. And so we can make the most of our time together. We're asking you to put your questions on the index cards. After you write your question, raise your hand. One of our crew will come and get your card. We'll sort through them to avoid redundant questions and have a balance across issues. And then starting at 2:05, I'll read your questions to the panelists. And if you want me to ask your question to a specific panelist, indicate that on your card. If you didn't pick up the sheet that has the names of the panelists there on the front, you can just get one. Yeah. So, very important. Please write so that I can read it. Otherwise, I can't ask your question. So for the first round of audience questions, we're asking for just one question per person. And if we have time, after everyone who wants to has had a chance, you can ask a second question. So if you didn't get a card yet and you want one, raise your hand, we'll bring a card to you, or at any time, we've got plenty of volunteers, just raise your hand, somebody will bring you a card. So we'll now hear from Professor Allen, and we'll introduce our other panelists in a minute, but let me give you a quick introduction to Professor Danielle Allen, a political theorist, scholar, author, and activist known for her work on democracy, civic participation, and justice. Danielle is the founder of the Allen Lab for Democracy Renovation, where she focuses on building more inclusive and representative political systems. A former candidate for governor of Massachusetts, she brings both academic and practical experience to conversations about strengthening democratic institutions.
Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you.
You got fans in the house.
Well, it's just so nice to be here with all of you. Thank you for making time on a Saturday afternoon. I mean, life is so full. We have so many pressures and sources of anxiety. So to have a chance for a space of reflection, especially in a beautiful space like this, is a true gift. So thank you very much for making that time. I'm sitting here today really because about 5 years ago, I was sitting in Springfield in another church called Spring of Hope. And there was a long church service, several hours, and then afterwards, like this community gathering to talk about issues of concern. I was just really so impressed by how insightful everybody was there talking about issues in Springfield. For example, challenges with asthma connected to pollution, challenges around housing, challenges around policing. And then late in our conversation, I asked the people in the room, so you're gonna vote, right? There was an upcoming election. And I was really taken aback by how many people said no. Here, this room, was a room of incredibly engaged people, smart people, thoughtful people. They had clear understandings of things, and then they weren't gonna participate in our elections. So I, of course, asked them why not, and it wasn't rocket science. I mean, the answer was, there were no choices on the ballot. That was only a part of the answer. There are a lot of other things. As I began to dig into it more, spent more time visiting with folks from that church in the months afterwards, as I learned more about what barriers and obstacles were to participation here in the Commonwealth. But that moment really, for me, gave me a sort of sense of purpose about democracy here in Massachusetts. And then over time, I've come to understand that the question of how well we do at democracy here at home is tightly connected to how well we do at democracy for the country at large. So we have a lot to talk about today. And having opportunities for structured conversation around how we organize our election systems is incredibly valuable. So I want to really thank the Unitarian Societies of Northampton and Florence and the Edwards Church for making space for this. If we could give everybody a round of applause for our hosts. That'd be great. And I'm just grateful to Dave for moderating, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So let's go.
All right. Thank you, Danielle. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the other two panelists and then read the ground rules, and then we're off and running. So, to my left here is Jesse Littlewood. Jesse has over 25 years of experience at the intersection of movement building, democracy, and technology. Jesse held leadership roles at national organizations like Green Corps, the Public Interest Network, and Common Cause. Previously taught social change at the Harvard Kennedy School. Most recently as vice president for campaigns at Common Cause. He grew their network to 1.5 million supporters, raised $25 million, and now manages the Coalition for a Healthy Democracy. Thanks for being here, Jesse. And at the end, John Griffin, civic leader, advocate with Partners in Democracy, focused on strengthening democratic participation and advancing electoral reform. His work centers on building more inclusive systems that expand voter access and engagement at the local and state level. He brings an on-the-ground organizing perspective to conversations about how reforms, like all-party primaries, can make democracy more representative and responsive. Okay, so that's the panelists. Thanks for being here, all of you. Okay, ground rules. Since we have a lot of ground to cover, we're asking you to keep to the time limits, which I'll give you for each question. Ben will hold up the yellow card. Well, no, sorry, I got to change that. The green card that says 30 seconds on it, and an orange card. Your time is up. So I'll tell you for each question, it'll be like 1.5 or 2 minutes typically per question. Now, everybody and panelists, there's 4 waves of questions. Wave 1 covers structural problems. Wave 2, why these initiatives? Wave 3 focuses on all-party primaries, and Wave 4 covers tough questions. Now, the reason all-party primaries gets its own wave is we've found that it has generated by far the most debate among these 4 initiatives. And most of our tough questions, the ones that we have generated, you'll see will focus on all-party primaries. I might abbreviate that as APP, all-party primaries, APP. So panelists, please note, it's fine to give up your time if another panelist has already covered the main points you want to cover in a question. And because audience questions are so important, we're going to do our best, and I think we'll be able to meet it. We'll start your questions by 2:05, so we have plenty of time. Okay, so here we go with question number 1. And question number 1 is to all the panelists, and please take about 2 minutes or less per person if you can. What are the 1 or 2 most pressing structural problems facing Massachusetts democracy right now, whether the ballot box, in the legislature, or in how citizens engage with their government? And why don't we do this just in a row, Jesse, Danielle, and John? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and good morning. My name is Jesse Littlewood. I'm coming from West Roxbury, where I am a member of the Theodore Parker Unitarian Church, so it was good to be here with fellow Unitarians. My answer to this question is urgency. What we are lacking here in Massachusetts is an urgency to move forward on the promise of democracy. And I want to describe 2 particular influential individuals that make me think that urgency is necessary. One is Theodore Parker, as a Unitarian leader who clearly knew that urgency was vital. We recently had our minister gave a brief background on some of Theodore Parker's work on helping runaway slaves in the antebellum period, as well as an urgency, and is often credited with the idea that the arc of history bends towards justice. But that only happens when we participate. And so the second vital individual who is here with us somewhat in the room is John Lewis, where I see there's a John Lewis Protect Our Vote sign in the corner, and John Lewis's call for all of us to get into good trouble, that is specifically the challenge I think that our state is facing. We have serious issues in Massachusetts that are caused by a lack of urgency of moving forward in progress despite having the tools at our disposal. We're the highest cost of living state in the lower 48. We've had flat income over the last decade, but housing prices have risen about 70%. There are urgent structural challenges that are facing our state, and we are not moving forward on them because we have a lack of urgency by lawmakers. So far, in the second Trump administration, Massachusetts has passed the fewest laws of any state in the country. There is a lack of action taking place, despite the challenges that we face that have pre-existed and now are coming from the current administration. So my answer here is urgency.
Thank you, Jesse.
Well, I will round that out by saying that democracies are healthy when the institutions of the democracy belong to the people. When they belong to the people, then you have that urgency and that responsiveness that allows for addressing people's needs. When you have a lack of competitive elections, as we have in the last decade, more than half of our elections have had only one candidate, you can't hold elected officials accountable and your institutions don't belong to the people. Similarly, when you have elections that are mainly decided in low turnout primaries instead of the general election, the institutions don't belong to the people. 20% of the electorate are choosing office holders instead of the 64% that turn out in the general election. Over and over again throughout history, you find that it's at the points when the electorate gets eroded and a small percentage actually is participating, that's when you're most vulnerable to autocratic takeover. So our national problems are actually connected to some of the weaknesses of democracy that we have, even in blue states like Massachusetts.
And I'll build on that just to say, I think what we're seeing in DC right now is the effects of a political system in Massachusetts and most states of the country that doesn't invite people into conversations about what their shared future should look like. It actually pushes people away. And we're seeing what happens when elected leaders, political leaders, don't feel like they have to engage citizens and residents in questions about what the future should be. It's the same in Massachusetts. I think we've all had experiences where we've gone to the ballot box and had no choices on our ballot. We've all gone in knowing that we have concerns about housing in our communities, about energy costs, about the state of democracy itself, and had no way to actually engage. And the ways that you can engage are so behind closed doors, so difficult to even know and understand, that it allows only the most resourced people to do so. To Danielle's point, the way in a democracy that you should be able to engage is through competitive elections. You should be able to go to the ballot box knowing what you want to see in your community and actually show that to your elected leaders and have them listen and understand and respond. We don't have transparency in Massachusetts. We don't have accountability in Massachusetts at the level that we need. And it all comes down to not giving voters the choice and the trust to choose. And the way that we can be a leader for what should come next for democracy in the United States is for Massachusetts to actually call people in to the political process and say, we trust you, the voters, and we want you to decide what the future should look like.
Thank you. Okay, so we're running a little ahead of time, so we can take 2 minutes per person for the next question. There will likely be a suite of democracy reform initiatives on the 2026 Massachusetts ballot. And the likely is because the legislature has a chance to actually take up any of these initiatives and turn them into bills. But that's very unlikely to happen. So this suite of democracy reform initiatives in November will cover Election Day voter registration, sometimes called same-day voter registration, public records reform, legislative stipend reform, and all-party primaries, APP. So those are 4 initiatives. So I'm asking the panelists, how do these initiatives relate to each other? And let's start with John.
Sure. Thank you, David. The 4 together, I think, are exactly about saying that the people should decide instead of having decisions made behind closed doors. And I think that Election Day voter registration and the history of Election Day voter registration is a really good example of why we need all 4 of these measures together. Election Day registration is very clearly a way to open up the process and allow more people to vote. And most states in the country understand this. About half of states have election day registration, so does DC. Every blue state, most purple states, several red states. Massachusetts has had a movement to get election day registration for decades at this point. And there is supermajority support for it among voters in Massachusetts. A supermajority of people in Massachusetts believe that we should allow every resident, every registered voter to vote on election day and register to do so. But it doesn't happen, and we can't see why it doesn't happen. The bill doesn't move forward through the legislature. In year after year, it gets debated behind closed doors in a committee. It has sometimes moved beyond that stage and then been voted down. But we don't see that process because we don't have right to public information for the legislature in Massachusetts. I'm on a planning board in my hometown. When we make a decision, every aspect of that is public to the voters. It's not for our legislature in Massachusetts. And if you don't like that as a voter, or if you don't think that your elected leaders are representing what they should, or if you want to go and say that they do, you don't have a choice because there's no actual election on the ballot for you to engage in. So we need to invite people in by allowing them to vote. That's election day registration. But to create a more responsive system where that can happen, you need choices on the ballot. That's where all-party primaries comes in. And you need the information to decide who to vote for. Open records, having a clearer, more legible choice on the ballot.
Thank you.
Well, I'll take us back to Springfield again. One of the people that I met when I visited the church that 5 years ago was a woman named Ayanna Crawford, who ran for school committee in Springfield, and really mounted a great campaign. It came close but didn't quite make it. She shared with me that in her campaigning in the last couple of weeks before the election, 1 out of every 4 doors that she knocked on was a person who actually wanted to vote for her but hadn't registered. Mm-hmm. And the number of people that it was would have made the difference in the election. So in that church, there was Ayanna who shared that story with me about the experience of her school committee election. There were also people, in addition to the ones who said that they didn't vote at all because there were no choices. Then there were another group of people who explained that they were unenrolled because they considered themselves to be taken for granted by both of the parties, but also our dominant party in our one-party state, the Democratic Party. And 65% of voters in Massachusetts are unenrolled. And so in that regard, all of those voters, although technically they have a right to pick a Democratic or a Republican ballot in any primary, nonetheless their participation is actually lower because of that forcing of a choice when they don't actually feel represented by the parties. So across that conversation, I just kept hitting different obstacles that were limiting people's participation, even though they obviously had so much to give to our public conversation. So John explained how the things are connected structurally and systematically. I want to communicate that these different experiences are connected in people's lives on a daily basis. And so the cluster of ballot initiatives are really targeting that suite of experiences that people are having.
Thank you.
I have limited additional comments to add. I think where I would context these 4 ballot initiatives are within what appears to be a 2026 ballot that will have up to 11, or is it 12? I think maybe it could be 12. Could be 12 different initiatives on the ballot. That's more than I believe the history of the Commonwealth has ever had on the ballot. And that is a challenge for voters. That's a lot of information to process. That's a challenge for election administrators. It's a lot of paper to create and ballots to have. And it is a reflection not only that there are urgent democracy needs, but there is a public policy debate that's no longer happening and getting solved through the legislature, and instead advocates are turning to the ballot. So that is the context of what's happening on our ballot this year. If public policy isn't able to be deliberated, debated, and ultimately decided in the legislature, the ballot box and the citizen initiative petition is that relief valve, that opportunity for citizens to directly to take their questions and their issues to the voters. Democracy, for me, is the number one important issue to put on the ballot, and that's why these 4 are on the ballot and moving together. But we're not alone. There's conservation issues, there's all kinds of, there's rent control, there's income tax reduction, there's all kinds of other issues that are happening from a whole different set of actors across the political spectrum. I believe that if we're able to move these democracy reforms forward, we'll see a more productive legislature and political system that is responsive to the urgent needs of our state.
And this isn't a question on the list, but let's just clarify. There's no competition, right? Like all these could pass, all 11 could?
That's right. There, each will be voted up or down 50% plus one,
Okay.
and they'll pass.
Okay, since some folks here like me are fairly new to the realm of ballot initiatives, the next question, and I'm going to ask Jesse to take about 5 minutes or less. Can you walk us briefly through who proposed and wrote these initiatives and why? And where do the initiatives stand now, roughly, in the process of getting them to the November ballot?
Yep, absolutely. And I'll also remark that Partners in Democracy has created a really wonderful one-pager that people have, I believe, were handed as they came in. So that's a really great resource to have. So the first initiative is the Election Day registration, which was submitted by Secretary of the Commonwealth, Bill Galvin. So that's our Secretary of State position. Bill Galvin is the Chief Elections Officer in the Commonwealth. He has a ballot committee that put that initiative, gathered signatures, and now has it in front, is working its way towards being on the ballot. That's the first. The second is the public records reform. That initiative was actually started by Coalition for Healthy Democracy. So the text of that initiative was written by our committee, and it is also now working its way through the process and will potentially be on the ballot. And I think we've talked briefly about what it does is it opens up the legislature and the governor's office to the same set of transparency rules that every municipal government and every state office has to abide by. Currently, the governor's office and the legislature has a blanket exemption to our state public records law. This would align it with other new exemptions to protect some of the differences of those bodies, but it would put everyone under the same public records law. The third is the all-party primary ballot initiative that was started by Coalition for Healthy Democracy as well. So Coalition for Healthy Democracy moved 2 of these. Secretary Galvin did the Election Day registration, and then the last is the stipends reform, which John can speak more to, and was created and put on the ballot by I keep reading about LEAP, Committee to Reform Our Legislature, and the ballot committee called the Legislative
LEAP, called Legislative Engagement and Accountability Project.
Legislative Engagement Accountability Project. So those are all the official ballot committee structures that if you ever want to look up them, that's what you would end up finding out about them. Now, the process for a ballot initiative is the same regardless of what the topic is. In the first thing you have to do is write language that then goes before the Attorney General's office, who does a ruling about whether that language is consistent with Massachusetts laws about what can go to the ballot. And there are rules. There are certain things that can't go directly in a ballot initiative but have to be a constitutional amendment. And there's also a rule that says if you can reasonably take apart one question into multiple questions, you have to do them individually. So think about it like you can't just pack, a million different unrelated issues into one ballot initiative. You have to have them all separate. So this year there was 42 initiatives that were submitted, which was a high water mark. Many of them were approved, as in they are allowed to move forward to the next phase. And the next phase is gathering signatures. You have to gather 75,000 valid registered voters from the state, no more than a quarter from any one county, so that there's geographic spread. Then those have to be confirmed by town officials, and then they have to go to the Secretary of the Commonwealth. They have to be confirmed there. So far, all of these 11 new initiatives, plus one that was already going to be on the ballot, have crossed that threshold. They have successfully qualified to become a ballot initiative. There are a few more steps in the process. The legislature can choose to pass any ballot initiative as a law. They have until the beginning of May to do that. It is very unlikely that they will do that for any of these initiatives, but they do have that option. When they decline that option, the initiative proponents will need to gather an additional 12,000 valid signatures from registered voters in the state who are not all in no more than 25% from one county. And then it will move forward to being placed on the ballot itself come November. And that's when you would get a ballot initiative number. So what number you'd be on the ballot happens in late in the summer. And if there's any last legal challenges or certification challenges, if you think that people didn't truly get the number of signatures required, that all winds up over the course of the end of the summer. So it's a long, arduous path that has a lot of steps placed on it, but at this point, enough advocates have thought that this is their path to creating public policy that they're proceeding along that path.
Thank you. Okay, before we move into wave 3, 2 quick things. I was remiss not to mention, and I apologize for not mentioning this, that here we are in Edwards Church, which quite graciously gave us the opportunity to be here since it's a larger space than our Unitarian Universalist Society across the street. And I see quite a few folks I recognize from our UU and quite a few other folks. So I'm right now thanking from the bottom of my heart Edwards Church for making this space available. And the second thing is, I don't know about you all, but I already heard some things that are prompting me to ask further questions. So as soon as you have a question, so we can kind of avoid a bottleneck of 10 questions showing up at once, as soon as you have a question, jot it down and raise your hand and somebody will come pick it up. Okay, there's somebody with a question. Great, thank you, Shel. Okay, so now we're going to move into wave 3. Just keeping track of time here, which is 2 questions on the topic of why all-party primaries. So in about 1.5 minutes per person, and Danielle, maybe you'll go, no maybes, you'll go first this time, and then Jesse, and then John. So Danielle, first, please tell us what you think is the most important reason to support an all-party primary, and then we'll go around. Go ahead.
All right, I'll just say first, I love watching these questions pop up, among you. It's sort of like popcorn. We'll get more and more. It's great. So just to restate what the all-party primary is, this is where we get rid of traditional party primaries for our state and federal elections, and all the candidates from all parties appear on the same ballot. If you're a voter, that means you walk into the ballot box and you get a ballot with all the choices, and then you vote for your favorite person, and the top 2 vote getters go forward to the general election. This is pretty familiar. We do it already a lot in a lot of municipal elections around the Commonwealth, so we can say more about the details, but just so that you have clarity about that. And the most important thing about it is it shifts, again, the decisive point in the election from the primary to the general, so that we have competition all the way through. And so it's in that moment when 64% of the electorate is turning out that we make our choice. And that means everybody has a vote that matters. So that's my most important reason, that it gives us a meaningful vote.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, John. Why don't you go next?
I'll second all of that, and I'll say, when it comes to what I spoke about earlier about inviting people in, that also means you have to have information to vote, and you need to be trusted with the knowledge that you need to make choices. And I think that all-party primary is about saying that voters should have both the power to decide and the information to decide. So another thing that our ballot initiative does is it allows organizations that endorse candidates to have that endorsement appear right on the ballot. So you could see the AFL-CIO has endorsed a candidate, it appears right on the ballot. You could see a local grassroots organization has endorsed a candidate, that appears right on the ballot. And what that means, again, is we in Massachusetts have a lot of questions in our public life that don't get decided right now in our general elections or in our elections at all because there's no competition. We're going to put that competition right on the ballot so we can have that debate, and the voters will be able to see what coalitions all of these candidates represent, where they stand on issues, who they might support or not support in elected office. And it allows voters to make the actual decisions about what direction the state should take. So again, it's saying you should have the right to decide as voters. We all should have the right to decide. And that decision should be legible and visible, and it should be available to all of us to actually know the stakes. So one limitation of city elections is often people won't know necessarily who's on the ballot. Like I said, I'm in a municipal office. We have low turnout in our elections, and I'm sure that a lot of voters are not totally sure who I am in my town. But under all-party primaries, when you have that election on the ballot, you know what party someone belongs to. You also will know what coalitions they belong to and where they stand on issues. It's a way of making sure that all voters have the information they need to decide, and that we're calling everyone in to exactly the kind of conversation and debate that we're able to have here today.
Thank you.
My number one reason why I believe the all-party primary will be a really positive force is because it realigns the incentives of our elected officials. Right now, we have one of the highest incumbency retention rates in the country. We have pretty much more or less folks are elected, and then in their reelection campaigns, if they are challenged at all, they're almost guaranteed to win. We have something around the edge of about 99% incumbency rates. Now, that could be that folks really love their elected officials, and many of them are fantastic. But it also is an indication that they don't necessarily have to take the challenging, difficult issues because they know that they'll return the next term, that they have the opportunity to come back. Realigning incentives means if you don't have an easy path to automatically be reelected, if you have to go to a general election where there will be real opportunity for an alternative on the ballot, it means you have to deliver. And by delivering and by making sure that you are showing up for your constituents in your district, that gives a different set of incentives to make more action and more progress on the challenges that the state is facing. So in an all-party primary system, we've seen in other states that the incumbency rate is meaningfully, not massively smaller, but meaningfully smaller. So instead of 99%, more like 94%. So that there is actual competition. There is the ability of an incumbent who is truly representing and delivering for their district to get reelected, but it's not a guaranteed pathway. And this way, there's a different alignment on the incentives to actually make more productive action happen.
Thank you. So the next, last question of Wave 3, John, your organization works across multiple advocacy areas in the Commonwealth. Would the all-party primary be of particular benefit to some constituencies, and if so, why? Take about 2 minutes.
I think that all-party primaries is a way to make sure that the grassroots have an actual way to have a bigger say on the ballot in the primaries and in the general elections. And I think that across our political system in Massachusetts, the fact that we have so little competition and so many decisions get made behind closed doors means that the entities, the people that have the most resources, the most time, the most familiarity with the decision makers and the processes are able to use those resources to work the system. They know that they can spend a little bit of money in a low turnout primary and affect an outcome. They know that if they spend their lobbying money in the right way, they'll be able to impact a public discussion in a way that a grassroots organization or an average voter just does not have the time to engage. With all-party primaries, you actually will be able to set the decisions that affect the state on the ballot. And if you're a grassroots organization, you can put your endorsement right on the ballot so that the voters that trust you in your community will vote accordingly, if they trust you. It's a way that we can set elections so that they operate on public trust and public awareness instead of on the money that gets spent just to raise name recognition in low turnout contexts. So I think that it has benefits across the state, but especially for the organizations, for the individuals, for the voters who have the fewest resources to use in elections under our current system.
Thank you. So we've just heard a case for all-party primaries. So now we're going to have a bunch of questions that come from a skeptical perspective, and I'm really glad to see there's a whole pile of questions from you all. Keep them coming. Okay, so the first question, I'm going to direct these to panelists and give them the time frame. So Jesse, take 2 minutes to answer the following. One concern raised by opponents is that all-party primaries would attract large donations because campaign financing becomes more important when candidates have to raise money to compete across the entire electorate twice, in the primary and in the general. So this dynamic could increase the influence of money in politics and could even attract right-wing interests seeking to dominate our elections. And with a large field of candidates, small donations would be spread thin. So how do you respond to these concerns?
Yep. I think it's true that in states, when you look at other states that use this all-party primary system, which include Alaska, Washington State, and California, there has been an increase in the amount of competitive elections, and therefore money that goes into campaigns has increased. I think that's a good trade-off. I'd rather have competitive elections that have people running, which necessarily means people have to spend money to run, as opposed to uncompetitive elections. I think the question is there an outside influence or a tipping of the scales that happens from big money interests? And there the evidence is truly not clear in terms of being related to the election system. California has very high individual contribution limits. It's about $80,000 individual contribution limit to the gubernatorial race. That is not the case in Massachusetts. We have very low individual contribution limits. It's $1,000. California has very, very large legislative districts. So there's a lot more voters, and so there's probably more spending that happens there. Our districts are smaller. Our state is more akin to Washington State in terms of population and political geography. And in Washington State, there hasn't really been an increase in the amount of money in politics in an outsized way since Washington State adopted the all-party primary top two system. So I think a lot of it has to do with what are the structures and the political economy and the political culture of the state. And in Massachusetts, with low contribution limits, a history of grassroots organizing and grassroots campaigns, I don't believe that we will see a big outsized influence. And in fact, there was a recent sort of test case around this, which would be the Boston mayoral election, where Josh Kraft outspent Michelle Wu significantly and still lost in a top two race. There are other states where this has also happened, and then of course there are states where outside money has played a decisive role in partisan primaries. So the question really becomes, how do you compare against it? And given what we know about Massachusetts, I think that we will be in a good place to continue to have grassroots campaigns that end up electing election officials without big money influence taking over the elections.
Okay, thanks. And everybody, let's watch for that orange card because I see the audience questions continuing to pile up. We want to get this section done by 2:05. Danielle, the next one's for you. 2 minutes if you can. Some progressives say that all party primaries would produce a moderating effect on candidates, that to appeal to a broader electorate, candidates would not champion bold, visionary proposals. How do you respond to that categorization?
It's interesting. That is something that we hear people say. I think it actually misunderstands the nature of the election mechanism. I've been making the point that in the top two system, the decisive election is in the general election. So what really matters is the question of who is the jurisdiction, who's in the district. A top two election system or an all-party primary does not favor any particular ideology. What it does is elect people who are going to be broadly appealing to their district. So in progressive districts, you will elect progressives, like Michelle Wu in Boston, for example. And in more moderate districts, you will elect more moderate individuals. So it's not that the election mechanism has that effect. It's really that the election mechanism reflects the district back. And so again, in progressive districts, or Mamdani just won a de facto top two in New York, for example. So what matters is the underlying spread of opinion in the district.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is going to be for Jesse. You can interpret this question, please, even more broadly than you hear it. The current proposal advances, it's basically why only two, why top two? The current proposal advances top two vote getters from the primary to the general. In a large field, those two candidates could be quite similar, leaving voters without a meaningful choice. Why top two rather than top four? And also think about, in your answer, compare it to ranked choice. So it's a big question. Take up to 4 minutes if you need it.
So one is the big challenge that we're facing in Massachusetts is competition. And so without enough candidates, the idea of putting more into the general election isn't the biggest and most important challenge that we're facing. The biggest and most important challenge we're facing is, as Danielle mentioned, having more candidates that are able to run to the entirety of the district and of the electorate. It is possible to put more than two candidates into the general election in different systems. You need that many candidates to run. So as a case in point, Alaska uses an all-party primary, and then it uses the top four vote getters go to the general election, and it uses ranked choice voting to decide. All-party primaries is the first half of that. It is consistent with the idea of putting four candidates in the general, who then you could use ranked choice voting. However, because of the rules around how you do a ballot initiative, as I mentioned, you got to keep multiple things separated. The Attorney General in Massachusetts has ruled you cannot combine ranked choice voting in the general with all-party primaries in the primary. Those are two separate questions that have to be separated. So the initiative that's on the table in November is putting the all-party primary first and having top two vote getters go into the general election, because then you know you have a majority winner, which is a useful thing for a mandate to a district. We don't think that we'll end up with two similar candidates. We think we will have candidates that are broadly reflective or appealing or persuasive to the district. And by putting two forward, we are able to make sure there's a majority winner, and then if there's an interest later from the people of Massachusetts or the legislature to change that in order to have more than two and something like a ranked choice voting system in the general, it's perfectly consistent with the ability to do that. It's just we're not able to do that as a single ballot initiative.
Okay, thanks. The next one is another big one for Danielle. Spoiler candidates and vote splitting. Critics argue that all-party primaries incentivize strategic manipulation, that is, encouraging spoiler candidates to enter the race to divide the vote and influence who advances. And even unintentionally, a crowded field could pit progressive candidates against each other. So we've all seen dynamics like this play out. If you're paying attention to the news, you'll know that in California there could theoretically be two Republicans and no Democratic finalists. There's so many Democrats currently running in the governor's primary. So what in the initiative would prevent this?
Yeah, no, it's an important question, and I'm sure lots of us are feeling anxious watching California right now, so I know that that is on people's minds. So first, just some background facts about what has occurred with this election mechanism over time, and then an answer about the spoilers and what the protections are. So it's called lockout, the sort of phenomenon that people are afraid of, where you have, for example, so many Democratic candidates that you split the vote, and then people are concerned maybe two Republicans go forward, for example, in the governor's race in California. That is an event, rare event, sort of theoretical probability. It has happened twice to Democrats in the elections that have been held in California and Washington in the last decade in California and almost 2 decades in Washington. So in other words, more than 2,000 elections, or is that right, 3,000 elections? 2,000? More than 2,000 elections have taken place, and then that phenomenon has happened twice. So it is truly a rare event. Nancy Pelosi, for example, is extremely confident that the California election will resolve, and indeed it is resolving as we speak. The Republicans are essentially down to one candidate for all practical purposes at this moment, and the Democrat field is winnowing as well. So I think we're unlikely to see the lockout problem in California. Now, about the general question, spoilers and incentives and the like. So this actually, if you're a voter, you have the incentive to vote for your candidate. And so in that regard, it's a better system than in other systems where voters themselves are sort of gaming their choice. We do see, in both traditional party primaries and this system, candidates who invest in the opponent they want to have. So that feature of gaming is no different in this system from what we already see. So for example, think about the amount of Democratic money that has been poured into boosting MAGA candidates in Republican primaries. I personally think that's a terrible expenditure of money, but people have been doing it. And so, in other words, there's no more gaming in this system than exists in traditional party primaries.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question I'm going to ask John to take 2 minutes to answer. What evidence is there that voter turnout actually improves under an all-party primary system rather than declining because learning about a big field of candidates is just too much work? So, turnout.
So there's recent and growing evidence on this, and the evidence actually points in a slightly different direction than learning about a lot of candidates is too much work. What the evidence says very clearly is that voters are more likely to go to the polls when they know they have a real choice. So that's the one that's basically incontrovertible. It's if you're a voter, you are more likely to engage when you know that you've been trusted with a real choice. When it comes to all-party primaries specifically, in the primaries in California, you see about a 6% increase in participation in voter turnout. You see small increases like that across all party primary states, which is good in itself. So in Massachusetts, in 2024, our primary turnout was 17%. Again, in the primary where most of the decisions are actually made, 17% of registered voters went out and voted. So if you added 6%, that gets you up to about 23, better. But the bigger point here is that we already have a high turnout election in Massachusetts, in most places in the country, which is the general election. In the same year, in 2024, a supermajority of voters, over 60%, turned out to vote in November, where most of them didn't have a choice on the ballot. So yes, we increased the primary turnout, but we're also giving the decisive power to the voters who turn out already in the higher turnout election. And that, I think, is the bigger power of this initiative, is it says we don't want to tell voters that they're doing the wrong thing, that they're going to the wrong election. We're meeting voters where they are, which is the general election, and giving them the power to choose.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, any panelist, the first who wants to speak, can answer take 2 minutes. It's about the Public Records Initiative. Given the toxic political environment, people are afraid currently to write their representatives, given that their messages can end up on social media or in newspapers following FOIA requests. So how does this ballot initiative protect people who want to maintain confidentiality when communicating with their elected officials? If people are afraid to communicate, aren't we actually reducing their ability to participate in democracy? So who wants to answer?
I can chime in briefly on that. So 2 things about the Public Records Initiative. So the first is already municipal government and state agencies are covered under our public records law. So there is an existing set of agencies that if an individual converses with would already be able to be found through FOIA. So what we're changing isn't a whole new system, we're just expanding that to 2 other bodies, the governor's office and the Massachusetts legislature. So we're not creating a whole new scheme of public records that are now discoverable. We're taking the existing one that exists for municipal governments, state agencies, and we're expanding it to the legislature and the governor. And while doing that, we've added in this ballot initiative an additional exemption for the public records law that is specifically tailored to this concern. So if this law passes in November, the governor's office and the legislature will be covered under the public records law, and there will be an exemption that says if a constituent is communicating to their representatives asking for services, that is not a public record. That is not something that would be discoverable or released under the public records law.
Okay, thank you. So, folks who are sorting cards, please get ready because just in a couple more minutes, and I'm going to use my moderator's prerogative and just ask one more question, and then we'll get to the cards. So the last question, John, if you will, in 2 minutes. One of the structural problems many have identified, well, this is about State House leadership. And one of the structural problems many have identified is the concentration of power in State House leadership. And I know some of the folks here share with me the frustration in dealing with the hierarchy. We have 3 related questions on this. First, if that hierarchical dynamic doesn't change, what would APP primaries actually accomplish? Second, how would all-party primaries impact that concentration of power? And last, could it, in some scenarios, inadvertently strengthen that concentration?
So the legislature, the State House, I always like to say is full of good people.
Hey, John, could I ask you to lean forward just a
Lean
little?
forward more. Am I good? The State House is full of good people. I always like to start with that. When you get to know them, it's almost uniformly people that want to do good things for their community, and that's why they're in public service. Lots of them could do much more lucrative things with their time and with their life if they wanted to. They want to serve. The question is, are we building a political system that gives people the right mechanisms to serve the way that they want to? And again, part of that is that you need to have elections where people actually engage. So the hierarchy is definitely there. It's a very top-down legislature compared to other legislatures. It's a legislature that has a lot of power concentrated in the hands of the 2 people that lead each chamber, the Speaker of the House and the Senate President. Part of that is that they can hand out committee assignments that are related to bonuses that people get, extra pay. And the question is, when somebody wants to go against the will of leadership, what incentives are acting on them to not do that? And what incentives are acting on them to help give them a little bit of courage there? And if you're a voter and you go out to vote and you know that your legislator is maybe not serving the interests that you put them in office to do, if they're contributing to this hierarchical nature of State House leadership, and you don't have any other choice on the ballot when you go to vote in November, it's really hard to engage in that particular question. And if you're a legislator, you feel a lot of pressure from State House leadership, and you're not feeling a lot of pressure going in the opposite direction because there's no election. That elections are the way that voters can actually put pressure on their legislators. So will enacting all-party primaries itself just cause the hierarchy in the legislature to go away? No. There's many different facts that cause that hierarchy to congeal, and that's why we're supporting 4 different questions at Partners in Democracy. But what it does say is that if you're a voter and you're going to the ballot in November and you know that your legislator needs a little bit more of a push, you have an actual thing you can do to push them other than just calling into their office. You can actually vote for change.
Thank you. So now we're going to move to your questions. Approximately how many do we have, Ben? Oh, okay, good. So I got a couple more if we get through all these, and it's not 3 o'clock yet. But so, okay. Yeah, I'll figure it out. Great, thanks. Okay, so, and you're writing, and the first one looks like I can read it. Yes. Good, good. So thank you. I'm going to ask for the panelists' help on 2 things. One, if you hear I'm starting to read a question you think's already answered, just pipe up and say, yeah, we answered that. The second is if... Yeah, no, you're all smart people. The second is that names may not be on the cards, so I'm just going to kind of throw it up. And I trust you all to sort of balance your airtime amongst you, and I'll help out if there's a need for help. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. So, first one. I've been thinking that to build a healthy democracy, we first need healthy personal relationships to make sure everybody has sufficient time and other resources to participate. Legislation should address those, I think. Who wants to hit this?
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump
Please.
in on that. Thank you for that question. I think it's really important I'll just give you one more story, not the same church, but a different occasion. I was sharing, I come from a family with a long tradition of civic engagement. My granddad helped found one of the first NAACP chapters in Northern Florida in the 40s. And my great-grandparents helped fight for women's right to vote. I always love to celebrate my great-granddad who marched with suffragettes on Boston Common in 1917. And I tell stories about them all the time, sort of everywhere I go. And one time I did this, and then afterwards a young woman came up and she said to me, Danielle, I was listening to your stories about civic engagement, and I realized I also come from a family with a long tradition of engagement, but I'm not engaged. And so then I asked myself, why am I not engaged? And I realized it's because my housing is so expensive. So I know I'm not staying here long. I know I'm going to be moving soon. And that, really, at that moment, sort of clicked for me exactly the point of that question. We do have so much work to do on basic fundamentals in order to give people that foundation for empowerment that many of us can take for granted. So I second altogether just the importance of that question. I think what you're hearing from us on this panel is many advocates have been working on some of those fundamentals for a long time, and we're not finding responsiveness in the legislature. And at that point, you realize you actually have to make change to the electoral system in order to unlock change on many other pressing things.
Thank you. Here's a long one, but a tough one. I'm going to read it all. Without ranked choice voting or something like the Montana plan to prevent corporate dark money, wouldn't APP and same-day registration make us vulnerable to the meddling of someone like Elon Musk? Like in California, a crowded, infighting pool of Dems could lose to two Republicans, each of whom receive a small fraction of the total vote, buoyed by low-propensity voters who have essentially been bribed. Who wants that?
So
Jesse?
I'll take one piece of that, which is Elon Musk recently tried to buy a Wisconsin Supreme Court seat. As many folks know, Wisconsin Supreme Court is a pretty critical linchpin for national politics. Wisconsin is a key swing state, fights over ballot access and voting. But that failed because those elections happen in a top two, in a sort of this similar set of system, where the decisive election isn't with a small group of people in a primary, it goes to the full electorate, right? So it's actually a lot harder to buy your way into winning something when the electorate is bigger, when there's more of us. The more of us that are the decisive votes dilutes and makes it much more difficult for an outside influence to be able to swing things. So expanding the electorate and the number of people who have a decisive decision or a decisive vote is actually a protection against that kind of outside influence, which, as we know, currently does exist in our current political system. And so I see this as actually a response to that and a way of helping to solve that kind of influence.
Could I add just a piece?
Please, go ahead.
Which is
Use it closer to the mic.
closer to the mic. Let me pull it up.
You're the only one with a wireless mic. There's no stopping you.
Fancy.
Exactly.
Yes. I could get up and do cabaret maybe. But in addition to everything that Jesse just said, the question is, like, how does money interact with elections, and under what circumstances is money most influential? And it's in circumstances where there are, like Jesse said, small venues that are easily capturable, but then also situations where voters aren't otherwise aware of who is on their ballot, what they stand for, low information environments. So I like talking about low information environments, not low information voters, because I think that we should trust voters and empower them with the information they need to decide. And again, money is most powerful when it is used to build vote, like name recognition for candidates in situations where voters otherwise don't have the information they need. And another thing that our ballot initiative does is it gives voters that information. Because again, if you have the AFL-CIO endorsement, if you have the endorsement of a grassroots group in your community, if you have the endorsement of any organization in your community that has 50 registered voters, that goes right on the ballot. And we know that trusted information from grassroots organizations is just as powerful as high money spending when the voters can get that information. That's very well borne out by political science. And so this says, again, we're not trying to denigrate low information voters. I think that a lot of people try to, I think a lot of people are worried about low information voters per se. There aren't low information voters, there are low information contexts. And we can give voters the information that they need to decide, and that will make it less likely that money can buy our elections.
Thank you. The next question, I'm going to piggyback on it, a question that I've been hearing from progressive organizations. So one of you folks wrote, love the idea of all-party primaries, but why aren't you also pushing for ranked choice and/or campaign finance restructuring? So what I'm going to add to that to make it a two-part question is I've heard from many progressives that all-party primary campaign is diluting the grassroots effort to get ranked choice voting on the ballot. And many of them say that that's even more important. So two parts, why aren't any of you pushing for ranked choice and/or campaign finance restructuring? And how about this issue of diluting the grassroots energy to get ranked choice passed?
Okay.
Who's going to take it? Sorry?
We're fighting over that question. Oh. Right, although there's a bit more to say, if it's all right. We were sitting here fighting over wanting to answer the question again, so if that's okay, yeah? So I'll just share a little, and then I know Jesse has something to say as well. So first, I mean, actually across this collection of organizations, we are working on campaign finance issues, and I know John is going to want to talk about that. And also across this collection of people, we are also working on ranked choice voting. So we do agree with the idea that all three of these things are incredibly important for a healthy democracy. I work on ranked choice voting as the board chair for Fair Vote. John can talk about the public finance piece and campaign finance restriction, or getting corporate money out of politics. But the thing I want to say is really about the question of how you make change, which is not easy. Let's just start there. And involves getting really clear about what practically can be achieved at any given point in time. And so the reason we are talking about all 4 ballot initiatives is because we do think you have to work holistically to get to healthy democracy. And we do think these themes other people are raising are part of that story. But you also have to figure out the sort of order of operations, like what can get through when. So this state passed by ballot initiative, public finance for campaigns, and then the legislature repealed it. So that gives us a certain kind of block and obstacle there. We had the 2020 ballot initiative on ranked choice voting, and that lost. That produces another certain kind of block and obstacle. So you have to actually figure out, like, where's the narrow path that you can get through in order to get something changed, to open up the system and achieve the dynamism that you need in order to get everything else through. So partly what you're hearing when you hear about all-party primaries is a judgment about where that path of opportunity is to achieve dynamism and begin to bring the holistic change through that we know we need.
Was anybody else going to address it? No?
You should say about the public finance work or campaign finance work that you're doing.
I can speak to campaign finance. So Partners in Democracy, we work on campaign, we were actually on both of these issues. We work on both ranked choice voting, especially at the local level, and on campaign finance. And there are 2 initiatives that we're working on that could bring campaign finance reform to Massachusetts, both of which would be very impactful. One is that in a lot of our elections, there are big independent expenditure PACs that spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, also in ballot measures, and sometimes those are funded by corporations that can't spend in candidate campaigns, and they're corporations that are based outside of the United States. This is actually unconstitutional, and there are other states that have closed that loophole. It could bring hundreds of thousands of dollars of money that shouldn't be spent in our elections out of our elections. Maine closed that loophole, and it got a lot of foreign big power companies out of their elections. If we had had this, Uber would not have been able to have spent money in our ballot initiative 2 years ago. There's a bill in the legislature that would address this. We're working with the national organization that is running this initiative across the entire country. And again, we tried to put this forward for the ballot 2 years ago, and we're told that we can't do it as a ballot initiative. So it's something that has to go through the legislature, and for it to work in the legislature, you need a more responsive legislature. And this is how these things all come together. The other thing is exactly, I think David had mentioned, the Montana plan, which is a problem with Citizens United is that it says corporations have to be able to spend money because of speech provisions. The thing is, state law defines what a corporation is. And so Montana has a ballot measure that would redefine corporations so they could no longer spend money on elections. So that's something that we're also building support for here. Ballot measures require a lot of pre-engagement with communities. They require a lot of building awareness and knowledge. Sometimes it can be a multi-year effort, but these are all initiatives that we're working on in tandem because, again, it needs to be a holistic program to fix our democracy over years, not over months.
Thank you. So here's an interesting one. Dave keeps saying same-day registration. Same day is not on the ballot. Election day registration is. And then the note says, enables voters to register and vote only on election day. So I'm confused. Could one of you clarify the difference between same day and election day?
Sure. Do you want to do that?
Yeah, I can take this one. So it's true, these are two separate but very related ideas. So election day registration, the ballot measure that will be on the ballot for you, what that says is on election day, so the day that you go in to vote in person at the voting booth, so like November 4th in a year when the Tuesday is November 4th, on that day you can register to vote. As folks know, there are many days now where you can go in and early vote. So you can go into your town hall in the days before an election and vote. What same-day registration would do would say you can also register on all of those days to go in and vote. It's actually true right now that there is one day where you can already do that. The first day of early voting in any given election falls within the registration window. So there is already one day where you have same-day voter registration. Election day registration is what the secretary put forward. There are a bunch of reasons why that might be the case. The early vote days are much smaller in terms of the number of voters that go to vote in person as compared to either election day vote or mail-in vote. And if you had to have registration on those days, it would represent a pretty large cost to cities and towns, cost per registration, because you have to have people that are sitting there doing the registration. I mean, I early voted in my town recently, and I went in just for the voting, and there were 4 people sitting at the voting booth, and I was the only person that went in on that day in a town of 26,000 people. Election day gets you 95% of the benefit, and it's a lot less difficult for the cities and towns to deal with. That doesn't mean that it's not a cost that should be borne. It doesn't mean that it's not a cost that we should figure out how to deal with. But in terms of getting 95% of the way there, I think election day is clearly a big win for the state of Massachusetts.
Thanks, and I'm still missing something. Does the ballot initiative election day registration, does it preclude registering on any other day?
It would mean that you could only register before the window starts or on election day itself. So you would not be allowed to register in the 9 days preceding.
Before the window starts, before the first day of voting.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks for that. That's really helpful. So here's a meaty question, and this is for Danielle. Can you link our work on these ballot initiatives in Massachusetts to the practical aspirations and proposals of the Our Common Purpose report? So you'll have to tell us a little bit about what that is. Some of you know. And how we move through the current authoritarian crisis. And there's more. In other words, can you paint a picture for getting from here to there that we can use to inspire people overwhelmed by the scale of the challenge?
Thank you. Yes. Those are the big questions. I appreciate them, and thank you for whoever that was from for being a reader of Our Common Purpose. Thank you. That's a report that was put out in 2000 by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. I was a co-chair of a commission on the future of the practice of democratic citizenship, and we put out a report with 31 recommendations. Some of them you'll be familiar with: term limits for Supreme Court justices, for example, ranked choice voting, proportional representation for Congress and increasing the size of the House of Representatives, a variety of things, investments in civic education. So this does connect, but let me start with the big picture. So we are dealing with a very significant set of problems nationally. I don't have to tell you that, right? And there are many different names for those problems: authoritarianism, autocracy, overreach of the executive, that sort of thing. As a technical matter, if you'll forgive me for a moment, the solution to that, the counterweight to that, is what people call legislative supremacy. Okay, who of us say that, right? We don't really use, that's not a phrase we use. But what that means is that the legislature at any level, state or federal, needs to be the first branch of government. The legislature has the job of channeling the people's will. The reason this matters is because when the legislature channels our will, it protects us from the arbitrary will of some one individual. Right now we're all experiencing what like arbitrary domination feels like. Every week we are experiencing that. The whole world is experiencing that. And our Constitution was designed to prevent that. But the feature of the design was having the legislature be the first branch. The legislature, as you know, our Congress, is not functioning as the first branch. So at a deep level, the single most important thing we have to do in order to get out of the sort of authoritarian world that we're in is to make it true that our legislative branch can be the first branch, that Congress can do that work and synthesize for us and be responsive to us. When you work on electoral systems, you're actually working at the sweet spot where state politics and federal politics come together. So Jesse at a certain point said he liked the all-party primary system because it changes the incentives for elected officials. This is true not just for our state, but also for the federal system. In Congress right now, most people are elected in gerrymandered districts with low turnout. Right, low turnout partisan primaries. And what that means is that most people in Congress have actually been elected by 5 to 8% of the electorate in their district. That's all. That means that's who they work for. So the most intense and most activated parts of the electorate is who they work for. That's what gives us a polarized Congress. That's what gives us a dysfunctional Congress. A dysfunctional Congress is a vacuum into which executive power flows. Okay? So we need a Congress that can actually make deals with each other, can do the synthetic work of taking our 340 million different points of view and like doing the sausage making and generating like accommodations and compromises. We don't like that word, but that is actually what makes for stable politics where your legislature is leading. And the way you get that is by changing the incentives for elected officials so that they know they work for the majority of the people in their district. Following me there? So then with all-party primaries, that's what you get. You get that incentive where to get elected, you've got to work for 50% of the people in your district. Take Mamdani as an example. He got over that 50% threshold. That was huge coalition building work. He's going to have to govern in a way that lets him keeping that coalition together, keeping it strong all the way through. And that means he's going to have to be a problem solver. He's going to have to hear a lot of different voices and be synthetic in his work. So that sort of is a little part of me. You have to sometimes, like the Professor Danielle comes out, all right? So my little sort of constitutional lecture. But so that's why, so this for me, this reform is so important for the state because we need a dynamic, responsive legislature in our own state to solve the urgent challenges we have, from housing to electrical, to energy costs generally, everything people are struggling with. But it also gives us a federal delegation that has actually the sort of space to do the work it needs to do, especially collaborating with other states with this kind of system, to start rebuilding that capacity in the legislative branch of our government. Again, constitutionalism, so wonky, so many people sort of eyes glaze over, but I do feel like we're at a time in our country's life where we just have to like dig in and think about that stuff again and be designers so that we can design for a functioning system of self-government. So that's what we're all up here working on. Yeah, all right, thank you. Okay, I
That's
appreciate
right, that's
that.
why we're here, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, here's a real big question. I'm glad I don't have to answer this, but I'm glad one of you will. How did Massachusetts get to the situation we're in of such a severely constricted democratic process? I think you could take more than 2 minutes.
Can you do that one?
But let's learn from history.
So we didn't always have as low competition, as low turnout, as low responsiveness as we do now. And if you look back 100 years ago, the parties operated in a very different way in Massachusetts. We had actual mass politics. We had parties that engaged at the level of community. Yeah, am I losing? Let me.
You want to use mine?
Sure.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much. Boy.
The thing is that Massachusetts, now we're very loud. Hello. I can't win. Massachusetts is now dominated by one political party. It's the political party that I belong to, the Democratic Party, but it's one political party. That was not always the case. And even as recently as 10 years ago, it was more possible that you would have an actual competition between a Democrat and a Republican, at least for some offices, for the gubernatorial office. Again, I say this as a Democrat, but I think Charlie Baker being elected even now is much less of an easily imaginable thing than in 2014 because of the craziness that's happening in DC and because of what the Republican Party represents. So we have one party that is in control of the state, and almost all of the big debates that happen in Massachusetts, for that reason, that govern our public life, happen within that party. But our election system is not designed to actually bring those debates out into the public, because when you go to vote in November, it's not between the two sides of that debate, or the many sides of that debate. We're constricting the public debate to a partisan system that no longer defines the way that we all live our lives and the way that the state operates. So the answer, again, isn't to try and tell voters that they're doing something wrong, or to tell voters that they should believe things that they don't believe. The answer is to have a political system that allows you to have that debate out in the public and actually center the debate of public life in November when voters actually can weigh in. So what we know is that you need high turnout competitive elections to steer public life. What we also know is that Massachusetts is no longer a state where that can function if you're just restricting the choices to Democrats or Republicans. So you need to have a system that allows you to structure your public debate around the actual questions that matter, regardless of what party someone belongs to. The two people on the ballot in a lot of races will be two Democrats under all party primaries. That's just where the debate is going to be in Massachusetts, and it will let us have that more out in the open, where we can actually build coalitions like Mamdani was able to do in New York, where we can air differences or even grievances, and we can actually negotiate those questions together. When you don't have that, what you have again is a system where those questions get resolved behind closed doors, because they have to get resolved. Like, somebody has to win a debate, and if it's not happening in November in the election, it'll happen in a legislative committee room. It'll happen in a shadow primary where somebody decides who gets to even appear on the ballot. It'll happen in a party committee that meets at 7 p.m. on a Sunday night. And most of us don't have the time or the knowledge to do that. We have a way to deal with it. It's called competitive elections. And the way that we can bring those back is by saying, we're not going to restrict it to the party environment that doesn't exist anymore in Massachusetts. We're going to meet voters where they are.
Thank you. Does anybody want to add, or we're good?
Good, yeah.
Good? Okay. So I'm going to add to the next question. One of you wrote, can you summarize the points of the opposition to all party primaries? What are their arguments? But I'm not going to leave it there. I've been reading from groups like Progressive Mass and Massachusetts Teachers Association, SEIU, who have some objections to all-party primary. So I'm going to tack on, and we can, all three of you, take turns answering this if you want. So in addition, and I'm going to reframe, can you summarize the points of the opposition? I'll bet each of you, since you're all serious, deep thinkers, has one or two opposition perspectives, positions, that you think, you know, that's a really tough point. That's a really serious point. So that's the one I want you to definitely dig in on. And now I'm going to read two questions that come from the progressive perspective. Will APP create roadblocks to people of color candidates? And related to that, working class folks getting in because of the money requirements. And many progressive groups and unions oppose APP. Why? So I know this is a huge question, but I know you can all deal with it, so who wants to go first?
Maybe I'll go first. That's right. Yeah. No, thank you. I mean, these have been really robust and important conversations. I mean, we've been in conversations with folks like Progressive Mass since last summer. And also, you know, I think it's important that people know it's a conversation that has its different moments. I mean, lots of those questions I think that you're reading come from last summer. After that point, the MTA board had a vote. We presented at it, and they actually voted to take no position. So just people should be aware of that. And so in terms of opportunities for people of color, I care a lot about that. I mean, that is one of the things that has been most motivating for me in doing this work. And Massachusetts has one of the least representative legislatures compared to its population of any in the country. So in that regard, you know, we have only one direction to go, essentially. I mean, we're making some incremental progress, but we have not been making as much progress as other states. And I was struck early on in this that Washington State and California both have made much more rapid diversification of their legislatures than we have done. So I looked into that more. Well, it turns out California also has term limits, okay? So that's part of where you're getting diversification from in California. Washington State does not have term limits. It really is the reduction in the incumbency rate and the more frequent contestation of elections that has made openings for diversification of the legislature. So I am 100% clear that this system provides opportunities for new entrants into the political system. Where the concern is, and folks from Progressive Mass or SEIU will be very direct about this, it does come back to the money question. So, and you know, this is where you have to kind of make choices. Basically, a person will say to themselves, hey, look, like right now, I could scrape together the small donations and run in the party primary. And if I win, if I can manage to beat that incumbent, then I can coast through the general. I don't need to raise any more money. However, on the all-party primary system, you would have to run in the general as well. So you do have a higher burden of fundraising. So that is a fact about the system. And so then what the disagreement of perspective comes down to is, in my view, although it's true that having a system that you're done in the primary is cheaper, that's a trade-off I can't make. I think a healthy democracy requires competition. That means the general election matters. Like, it should be the election that matters, and I can't give that up. And so in that regard, that's why it's my job also to think about questions of public finance in elections. Partners in Democracy is doing that work. So you do need public financing, I think, to support that opportunity as a part of the puzzle. And then the last question comes down to sort of order of operations. What order do you do these things in? We attempted public financing in Massachusetts. It got repealed. We have a legislature that we can't hold accountable. I see holding the legislature accountable as the key to unlocking things like public financing that are also part of what you need for the opportunity for new entrants, including candidates of color, in our political system.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Anybody else want to tackle that?
I'll jump in. Another concern that I have heard in many conversations with people that consider themselves to be progressive, which in a lot of ways I would say that I share that identity, a lot of those sets of beliefs, is a fear about who votes in the general election as compared to who votes in the primaries. So I think, to put it really explicitly, I think that many progressives are afraid that the average voter in a general election is much less progressive than the average voter in a Democratic primary. I think just on a matter of is that true, there's a lot of different kinds of data to answer that question, and it will depend on what district that you're in. It is true that the primary electorate in Massachusetts is older on average, less likely to be more diverse in terms of race, more likely to be homeowners, higher income. What that means for exactly how progressive or not a particular district's electorate is, it'll be different in every district. But I think that the actual fundamental question has more to do about what you think the road to progress should be in a democratic society, as someone who believes in progress. And for me, I'm also going to call back to my grandparents in this. Is like, why do I do this in the first place? I grew up with my grandfather, who was the son of immigrants and never went to high school. And he was a waiter for all of his career. He ended up being the head waiter at the Copley Plaza Hotel in Boston, for anybody that's aware of the Copley. And early in his career, he was actually waiting on a pair of politicians. And one of them called him over to the table and asked him a question about current events. What the question was sort of lost to the family lore. And he didn't know the answer, and when he said he didn't know the answer, the person turned to the other person at his table and said, see, this is why we don't let people in. This is why we don't let the people decide. This is why we have the jobs that we have. And my grandfather, like I'm sure many of you can imagine your own parents, your own grandparents, people in your family, was a proud person who didn't have the opportunities that he needed to be let into those rooms. And so he spent the whole rest of his life proving that he shouldn't be that example. He read the Boston Globe from cover to cover every single day, and when I lived with him growing up, I would sit on his lap and do that too, and I didn't know why until he died and asked my grandmother, and she told me that story. My grandfather was not the most progressive person on every issue, but my grandfather deserved to be let into the room where decisions were being made, and if we want to see real progress, it has to start from the idea that everybody gets to have a seat at the table, regardless of what position they're coming from, and if we want people to be more progressive, we can't talk down to them or tell them that they don't deserve to be there just because they didn't have the opportunities that we did.
Yeah, hell of a story. Thank you, John. Next question. No matter how well explained ballot initiatives are on the ballot, no matter how well explained ballot initiatives are on the ballot, it doesn't matter enough if a huge segment of citizens aren't even registered. So how can this situation be improved? What's being done? What should be done? And is anything in place in the public schools to promote future voting? Want that, Jesse? Or?
So I'll add one component to that, which is when there's a competitive election, it is an incentive upon the candidates to find voters, right? And so you have to go out and you have to find your voters. And right now, because the elections are of a small turnout, many candidates have been told they need to focus on high propensity voters in order to win a turnout amongst other high propensity voters in that primary. And that shifts when you run to the whole of the electorate in the general election. With a competitive election, you have to find it incentivizes the campaigns and the parties to go out and find new voters. So one of the big drivers of voter registration is competitive campaigns where people are going out and finding more folks to register and to bring into it. So it is a chicken and egg problem, but I believe that increasing competition increases the amount of registrants and people who are participating as well.
I'll just add a couple of things. I mean, election day voter registration or same day voter registration, either of those policies, is actually the single most impactful policy around the country for increasing voter registration. So it's really good that we're headed towards a victory on that this year. And then lastly, I mean, we're both involved in a lot of civic education work. I've had the great pleasure of leading a group that designed a year-long grade 8 civics curriculum here for Massachusetts, and we're now the largest civics curriculum in the state. So at any rate, and that is certainly about engaging students to claim their own sense of civic agency. We keep coming back to this theme of healthy democracy isn't about a silver bullet. It is about people having a sense of connection to their civic power, experience, and responsibility. There's a whole kind of cultural component. It is also about our institutions and how they work, and we just have to work on both of these at the same time.
And I actually want to call out or shout out one person that's actually in the room here today, which is Partners in Democracy. We're part of something called the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition, which you mentioned, like how can we help people learn about civic engagement and voting. And somebody here, Joyce Hackett, who's in the room, has done a lot of work on getting high school students registered, is continuing that work. That's something that we highly support, and you should talk to Joyce if you want to talk about making sure that students are actually getting engaged early in life.
Thank you. So we have 4 more questions from you, and I think we will make it under the wire. Is there a parallel lesson to be drawn from the public's successful, strong advocacy of immigration protection bills, finally, in Massachusetts, and what we, the people, could accomplish by strongly advocating for pro-democracy bills in our state legislature?
Do you want to take that one?
No.
Or John, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So
Yes, yeah.
there have been a lot of great bills that have been passed recently on immigration protections and on privacy protections. And like I said earlier, I think it's very easy when talking about democracy reform to have a caricature in your head of who the person is in the legislature. And like I said earlier, there are lots of good people that are doing really good work and that are aware of what's happening in DC and trying to stop it from coming here. We actually have moved slower on a lot of these issues than other states, though, is the thing to keep in mind. And that is not for want of effort from a lot of our legislative leaders. And it's not for want of effort from many advocates. The fact is that we had No King's Day. We had a lot of action at the State House. We had a lot of public pressure on legislators to act on these issues, which again, shouldn't be oppositional. Like, that's not part of what I'm saying here. It's that there was a moment where there was a lot of public will and the legislature was responsive. And what we're trying to do across all of our measures is make the avenue to that kind of responsiveness a lot shorter and less rocky. Not that you don't have to work to get your policy positions passed, but that it's not like coming over a mountain to try and get a legislator to pay attention to you. I'm sure that many of you don't feel that way when you talk to your individual legislators. I know that I don't, but there's a lot that goes on in that building, and if you want to actually have the voters setting the agenda, it's important that they be able to see the process that's occurring in the legislature, which, because we don't have public records, is very hard, and that they have the ability to shape it. And the way that you shape it is through elections. So there's a lot of good work being done, and to me, it's a sign of what can happen when public pressure and public engagement is easier. You could have that happen more often in a system that has more open public debate and more open public input into the process.
And I would just maybe add one footnote, which is I'm going to take that question as somebody volunteering.
Yeah.
So whoever asked the question, you're going to have to come up afterwards and reveal yourself, because it sounded like you were volunteering to help build engagement for work in the legislature. And the short answer is that yes, that would be a good thing to do. There is good advocacy underway, but growing that into a stronger movement would be very beneficial. So please come up and let's talk. Oh, Arlene, thank you. Okay. Well, we will talk for sure.
Okay, next question. What are your thoughts about the inaction on the ballot initiative that was passed for the auditor to audit the legislature? Why should we believe that these 4 initiatives would fare better?
So the recap, issue 1, initiative 1 in 2024 was the ballot initiative that authorized the auditor to audit the legislature. It passed with, I believe, 72% of the vote, and so far no audit has happened. There have been 2 sort of justifications, I think, for that. One has been around legal wrangling about the remit of that audit, and then the other is sort of tied up in that in terms of what would be the scope of the audit and is there a constitutional question about doing that. So that is a particular, I think, aspect of what that initiative is doing, which is it is implemented by a constitutional officer on the legislature. When it comes to all-party primaries, a change in the election law is implemented by the Secretary of the Commonwealth, Bill Galvin. Secretary of Commonwealth has told us he is in support of all-party primaries because he believes it would create more competition in the state. It would also reduce administrative burden around county clerks. Instead of a Democratic Party primary and a Republican Party primary, and having people come in and telling them they have to choose one, and that kind of administrative burden, it would reduce that. It would also enable the ability of doing universal vote by mail with a single ballot in the primary, which would be a major improvement for voter access. So that's the implementation pathway for all party primaries. When it comes to the public records reform, it's an implementation that would extend the existing laws on the books. There may be challenges to doing that are thrown up in the roadblocks put in that, but it is not necessarily the same issue where a constitutional officer then now has a certain amount of authority placed over the legislature.
Okay, thank you. 2 more questions, and then Professor Allen, if you want to give us a couple of minutes of wrap-up, and then Ben, you've got some things for us. So, what do you think of the idea of citizens' assemblies, where everyday citizens take turns legislating for a short, predetermined period of time? Who wants that?
I can speak to this one. Okay. This may be surprising, maybe even to Danielle, but we actually are working on this in Boston. There's the potential to have a citizens' assembly on charter reform in Boston. I think citizens' assemblies are a great idea and a great democratic innovation. And I think the question always should be, what's the next step that we should take to try and open up our political process? And elections are a huge part of that, and I think opening the election system is the skeleton key to making our political system in Massachusetts more open generally. But there are also lots of places where average citizens and voters could come and deliberate on topics that might not be getting the attention that they need or the action that it might need. You could see this in charter reform issues. You could see this maybe on legislative pay, questions where the legislative process is not particularly well designed to come to consensus and agreement. Citizens' assemblies are occurring around the country. There's one happening in Maine on education policy. There's one happening in Connecticut on tax policy. There's one I mentioned in Boston. They have not yet in the United States been done with governance authority. There's been advisory. So we don't know yet how these will work in a system of representative government like the one that we have. I think that it's a good new tool that was worth experimentation. But again, I think the fundamental question of are elections doing the job that they should be doing has to be prioritized in a state where they're not.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and before I read the last question, I want to thank our question sorters. Is it Laurie, Teresa, and Andy for being so helpful. They really made this process go smoothly, and Ben too. Last question. For ballot initiatives, why 2 levels of signature gathering?
I think the technical reason is the sequencing where it allows the legislature to decide to adopt the law, and there's also an opportunity to make very small technical changes, like changing a typo that was in the language of your initiative. It is also, I think, true that Massachusetts, we are one of a few states that that has a direct democracy ballot initiative. Many other states are finding opposition to that right now. Ohio famously had a big fight about this in, was it 2024 or 2022, where some political actors in Ohio wanted to raise the threshold of a ballot initiative to be much higher than 50% for victory. That's also taken place in Florida. So there is a concentrated, oftentimes, effort, particularly by right-wing groups, to make it more difficult for ballot initiatives to succeed. We in Massachusetts have a challenging but not impossible ballot initiative process, and that I think is something we should be proud of. While I have the microphone, I want to thank David for excellent moderation and for this wonderful invitation to be here.
Okay, thank you. So, Danielle, please.
Well, first, I want to say thank you to all of you. Those were excellent questions, and it's just such a pleasure to have a chance to actually have some time and space to talk through the issues that are important to think about. You know, we're proposing something bold here. We're proposing taking a bold step so that we can bring democracy to vigorous life here in Massachusetts. This is the 250th anniversary of the country, of course, and we were the folks who got it started, right, in the very, very beginning. And I just have a deep belief that if we could reactivate us, you know, the heart of democracy here in Massachusetts, we can take those energies and actually also then carry them forward to the national level and really be the place where there's a renewal that begins, setting our faces to the future. And, you know, John was just talking about experimentation. The way democracy is going to thrive in the next 100 years, it's going to be different from how it was the 100 years behind us. And so we are at that moment where we have to make choices, and bold action is required. At the end of the day, democracy does depend on the people owning its political institutions. So that's what we're here for, is to really put government by the people so that it is for the people back at the center of our shared lives. So thank you for spending time with us. It's been such a pleasure.
Okay, thank you. So Ben, would you come up here, and we have a few closing tasks for everybody. You want to take this one?
Do I take the wireless one?
There you go.
This is why we had one wireless. So yeah, thank you all for showing up. My name is Ben Lukashevitz. I'm the organizing director for the Coalition for a Healthy Democracy. Some of our thank yous were already preempted here, but again, a big thank you to Dave for being a superb moderator. Not an easy task. I also want to thank the volunteers here and our organizers who helped plan this event, who helped facilitate folks in the door and organize our questions, so a big round of applause for them as well. As folks have sort of touched on a little bit, there's a lot of work ahead of us for this initiative, for the Coalition for Healthy Democracy, and all the suite of democracy initiatives that we've talked about today. And we have a lot of work ahead of us, particularly signature gathering in May. If you are interested in learning more about this campaign, about the work Partners in Democracy does on these other initiatives, I encourage you to find one of our superb organizers, Olivia or Ellery, to learn how you can get more involved in the campaign, or come up to one of us, because it really is going to take a village to talk to folks across the state to pull these initiatives over the finish line. And we encourage you to join and figure out how you can get involved or learn more. But yeah, thank you all for coming so much, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. A pleasure. Great pleasure.
It was so nice to have the space to really talk those issues through.
Yeah.
This conversation going, and I'd love to get cards from all of you so that
Absolutely.